I'm going to go ahead and say it because you won't. Africans sold our ancestors into slavery. A lot of you need to understand that the concept of race, as we understand it today, did not exist in pre colonial Africa. Now, race being your physical characteristics and your skin color. Now, in pre colonial Africa, your identity was rooted in your ethnicity, it was rooted in your regional affiliations, your language, your tribe, your kinship. So when we look at it in terms of, oh, Africans were selling their people or they sold our people into slavery, you have to think in terms of how they were thinking then. They were not selling their people. They were selling rivals. They were selling captives from other tribes, war captives. They were selling them. These weren't their people. They weren't a part of their tribe, their kinship. Race is a very new concept. People definitely identified with their tribes prior to colonization. Several African kingdoms participated in the transatlantic slave trade, mostly for economic reasons. I know a lot of the Pan Africans like to push, oh, they were tricked, they were tricked, they were tricked. Let's be real. The kingdom of Dahomey was a significant supplier of slaves to the Europeans during the transatlantic slave trade, and they were receiving all types of shit from metal, from mirrors, from alcohol, from guns. You guys have to understand the more guns that they were receiving because they were giving more slaves to the Europeans means that they had more power, more control to capture more slaves and give to the Europeans. The Ashanti again engaged in wars to capture slaves for the Europeans as well. I know a lot of people talk about the Ashanti and talk about how a lot of them were tricked. And listen, you know, I don't feel bad because you were tricked and your ass became a slave too because you were trying to turn other people into slaves. And I know a lot of people like to say, well, they didn't know exactly what was going on in the Americas, which they didn't. When they were capturing up these other Negroes and giving them to these Europeans, they didn't know what was ahead. They didn't know there was going to be decades and centuries and generations of like psychological and physical warfare put out on us. But at the same time, if they did know, would they have cared? No. The Aero Confederacy used religious influence and military power to control slave trade routes. They were, and this happened for generations. They knew what was going on. They were well aware of what they were doing. And yes, slavery did exist in Africa prior to colonization. Now, was the slavery different? Yes, it wasn't chattel slavery like it was over in America. However, it was slavery. And we got to stop acting brand new. Africans are selling their people into slavery right now. They're selling their people, they're trafficking their people all over the place. Like, I mean, you know, greedy people do greedy things. They don't care if it's at the expense of their own people. But again, we have to remember they weren't selling their own people into slavery. They were selling people of other tribes. The concept of race is new. And remember, this was done for economic and for political reasons. They wanted the power, they wanted the guns, they wanted the thing, the textiles, they wanted the things that they did not have access to. They wanted these things. I want the money, money and the cars, cars and the clothes. That's what they want. They wanted it. And they didn't care at what expense it came. So no, I'm not sitting here kumbaya and gonna sit here and pretend like, oh, Africans were tricked. They didn't know. So they knew they let me explain something to you. They might not have known to the extent, but they definitely had their hand in it. And they were wrong. And I feel like if y'all not gonna hold Africans today, the descendants, accountable for what their ancestors did, then y'all need to not be so quick to hold white people accountable. Because I'm gonna hold them both accountable.